Hello, everybody. We're going to start shortly. I know services got out kind of late, but you can come on down. It's okay if you fall asleep down here. Nobody will be upset. So we'll start in just a minute. Can you guys sit down somewhere, please? Glad you're here. Gamar Chatima Tova, everybody. Hey, Gary. Our first speaker today is Sheila Goldman. She's our interim executive director and our resident wizard. She's doing a great job. She has a varied background. She's worked in the corporate world for many years, and then she decided to switch over to Jewish nonprofit work. She's been assistant to a head of school. She was executive director at Shomrei Torah, and she'll tell you about her life. She's a fascinating person, and we're so glad to have her here.
Shana Tova. Can you all hear me okay? Good, good. As I reflect on my Jewish journey, I'm going to begin with a little story. It was 1952. My mom and dad had just packed up their little family, 2 small children, ages 2 and 4, and left New York City behind. They didn't have much, but they did have a dream to build a new life in California. Somewhere along the way, in a tiny town in New Mexico, we stopped at a little convenience store. My mom told the story with such vivid details from the time I was a little girl. As we stepped outside, there was a man sitting by the door. This man had no legs. He was selling pencils. He asked my mom about our journey and looked at my sister and me, and with a kind smile, he reached into his bag and gave each of us a pencil, the color of our choosing. Then he said something simple but quite unforgettable. These pencils, he said, will bring you good luck on your journey and in your life. My mom went into the store to find my dad to get a couple of quarters to pay the man, and when she went outside, he was gone. My mom was so moved that she often told us later that in that moment, she felt as if she saw God. And she was right, because from that moment on, we did in fact have a blessed life in California. That pencil became for me not just a tchotchke, but a symbol, a reminder that God sometimes appears in unexpected places through unexpected people, offering us blessings when we least expect them. We settled in Lakewood, a brand new planned community built in the post-war boom by Lou Boyer, Mark Taper, and Ben Weingart. My mom and dad bought a tiny home in this planned city and almost immediately became part of a small but passionate Jewish community, just 60 families strong. But I want to tell you something. Those 60 families were mighty. Lou Boyer donated land to the Jewish families, and together they built a synagogue from scratch. That synagogue became the center of our lives. It was where we spent every weekend, where we learned, where we celebrated, and where we grieved together. My mom and dad kept a kosher home. They were very traditional, and my 2 sisters and I were raised with Judaism, not as something distant or abstract, but as the very air we breathe. We walked to shul on high holidays, didn't turn on the lights, and on Pesach searched for chumetz in corners of our home and watched my father burn it with a feather over prayer. Counters were covered with boards and butcher paper. Passover dishes were unpacked. And my sisters and I sat on the floor reading last year's newspapers as my mom and dad unpacked dishes. Pots and silverware soaked in the bathtub for what felt like days. And my mom clopped egg whites by hand on her lap in her mother's white enamel bowl that she carried with her from New York. My friends loved coming to our house to watch my mom clop those egg whites, and we still reminisce about the cakes. The clopper is framed in a shadow box in my niece's home. Because we lived within walking distance of the synagogue and kept a kosher home, the traveling rabbis, many of them fresh from the trauma of the war, often stayed in our home. We didn't have sophisticated Hebrew teachers. What we had were passionate men and women who loved Judaism enough to share it. They weren't perfect teachers, but they gave us the love of Torah, the love of Judaism, for Torah, for prayer, and for community. My parents were deeply involved in synagogue life. My mom was president of Sisterhood, my dad sang in the choir, and they finished board meetings around our kitchen table, arguing endlessly about shul business. And every year at Purim, they manned the booths for the Jewish and Gentile kids in the neighborhood. On Passover, our home was always open to sailors stationed at the Long Beach Naval Base, young Jewish men far from home, searching for a Seder table. All three of us, my two sisters and me, had our B'nai Mitzvah on a Friday night. My older sister in 1960, we were trailblazers in the conservative movement. So, from my earliest memories, Judaism wasn't just a religion. It was hospitality, it was service, it was responsibility, and it was community. It was a family far larger than our own. When the Long Beach Jewish Community Center was built in 1960, my parents, who didn't have a lot of money, somehow found the resources to join. That JCC became the backdrop of my teenage years, the place where I first discovered that volunteering was a deeply held Jewish value, where I had the opportunity to join President Johnson's War on Poverty program. But mostly, it was a place where my closest friendships were formed. And through one of those friendships years later, I met my husband, Michael. When Michael and I married in 1969, there was no question in my mind we would build a Jewish home. We joined a synagogue as soon as our son Jeffrey was a year old. And for the past 52 years, synagogue life has been a thread running through every season of our lives. But alongside raising a family and keeping a Jewish home, I was also discovering who I was, my strengths, my voice, and my path. The work I did with National Council of Jewish Women when my kids were babies left me feeling deeply inadequate. I was volunteering alongside extraordinary women with advanced degrees in law, in social work, in education, in business, just to name a few. My lack of education tugged at my soul. So, at 30 years old, with 3 young children, including twins who had just turned 4, and an older child who was 7, a husband who could always count on me to run our home, I faced my fear and returned to college. It took 5 years of juggling public school schedules, carpools, baseball and soccer schedules, games, Hebrew school, dinners, and bedtime stories. But I walked across that graduation stage in 1985 with a bachelor's degree in communication. To this day, I say that diploma is the only thing that I did entirely for myself and by myself. And it changed everything for me. It gave me confidence, it gave me skills, It gave me the foundation to pursue careers I had never dreamed possible. My internship at Xerox, while still in college, opened the door to a 13-year career there. Xerox was my graduate school in management and leadership. I learned how to supervise staff, manage an $8 million budget, train a cadre of service and sales personnel on Kaizen, which was a newly developed Japanese concept in business that asserted that significant positive results can be achieved through the cumulative effects of many, often small improvements in all aspects of a business. Most importantly, though, I learned how to speak publicly and how to represent not just myself, but an institution. Those years were not easy. There were challenges and many rocks along the way. But the time I spent at Xerox was transformative. After Xerox, I took a leap and bought the first Cold Stone Creamery in California. Some of you might remember my ice cream store in the Lorena Shopping Center in Sherman Oaks. My husband, Michael, a CPA by profession, was hesitant. We had 3 kids in college with tuition bills piling up, but he supported me and taught me so much about accounting. It was my parents, though, who had faith in me. They took a mortgage out on their home and loaned me the money to start my business. For 5 years, I made ice cream. I baked cones and decorated ice cream cakes and washed more floors and windows than I care to recall when teenage employees forgot to show up. I probably served more than a few of you here today. It was the hardest physical work I had ever done, but deeply gratifying. And then, one freezing winter day, a man walked into my shop and made me an offer to purchase my store. I was very tired. There hadn't been a customer in hours, and the offer just too good to refuse. And so, with that sale, Michael and I did something bold, maybe even crazy. We bought a 33-foot motorhome, not knowing the first thing about how to drive it, or how to dump its sewer water, or the differences between a chassis battery or a coach battery. With determination, we put our furnishings in storage and leased our home. And then one January morning, we hooked up our little Honda to our motorhome and set out to travel the country for a year. That year was a gift to our marriage, but also a test to its resilience. We hiked in every national park we could. We met people of every background and faith. We explored more museums than you can imagine. And on those long drives, Michael and I had the conversations we never had time for before about a pending war in Iraq and unintended consequences Michael foretold. We talked about the type of art and architecture we liked. When we dreamed of refurbishing our home after our trip, we didn't realize until that journey that neither of us really liked our furnishings, which had been passed down from our parents and grandparents. We also began exploring what kind of religious life we really wanted when we returned. We had been part of the conservative movement since 1974, and I had served on Shomrei Torah Synagogue Board in many capacities. In fact, Rabbi Kamras assured me that if I took on the role of religious VP for a year and attended services every Shabbos, which I did, I would discover my place in conservative Judaism. Unfortunately, that did not happen for me. I still felt like a stranger in shul. On our road trip, something in me felt restless and unsatisfied. On the road, I realized I was searching for something different, something that spoke more directly to my soul. When we came home, we visited congregation after congregation, and then we found Leo Beck. And suddenly it felt right. Their deep commitment to social justice resonated with us. Judaism at Leo Beck Temple wasn't only about prayer and study, but about transforming the world. I threw myself into that work. Criminal justice reform, civic engagement, and even transportation advocacy with Measure M, bringing rail to Los Angeles. For me, that was Torah in action. And then came another twist. After working briefly in real estate development, building shopping centers, late nights, endless hours, even a Christmas Eve alone in the office, I realized that was not the life I wanted. So the next week, I walked into an employment agency, and I said, I will take any job. And sometimes the stars align. I was hired as the assistant to the head of school at Milken Community Schools. Those 13 years at Milken were some of the richest of my professional life. Surrounded by rabbis and educators, I learned every day. I loved working with families who entrusted their children to that community. Eventually, I became the director of community engagement, building programs, building relationships, and building a strong Jewish culture. And then, one afternoon, I received a call from Rabbi Camrus. It's quite amazing how connections in the Jewish world bind us, not with chains, but with relationships that continue to give and sustain us. 20 years earlier, I had been on the committee that hired him. And now, he said, Sheila, there's an opening for executive director, and I think you should apply. He was now opening a career door for me. I was terrified. I'd never been an executive director. I had never built a synagogue budget. But once again, I said yes. Those 4 years were hard, very hard. I led through the pandemic, acting as the COVID police, applying for government relief, securing security grants, closing our ECC, but keeping the religious school and synagogue afloat, building an infant daycare, implementing our Jewish after-school program, and serving on the committee that merged Temple Aliyah and Shomrei Torah. It was exhausting, but when I stepped away 2 years ago, I felt something deep, that I had truly served my community. And so, when I look back from that pencil in New Mexico to our small home in Lakewood, to Xerox, to Cold Stone Creamery, to Leo Beck, to Milken, to Shomrei Torah, and now to Adat Ariel, I see one continuous thread, a Jewish journey that has never stopped unfolding. That pencil was more than something to write with. It was a blessing. It was a reminder that sacred appears in unexpected places, often through the kindness of strangers urging us forward. My journey has been about questioning my faith, resilience, risk, and saying yes, even when I was afraid. It has been about building community and letting community build me. And today I share my story with you, not only so you can know me a little better, but so that you can reflect on your own journey. Who gave you your pencil? Who opened a door? Who gave you a blessing that shaped the path you would take? May we each continue our journeys with courage, with curiosity, and with the knowledge that we meet our destiny along the way, in the synagogue, in our homes, and sometimes even in the most ordinary of places. So here's to a year of renewal and growth and bringing strength and inspiration to each of you and to our entire Adat community. L'Shana Tova.
Wow.
That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. We have time for some questions if people have some questions. Oh, sorry. We have some time for questions for people who might have questions. And I said, wow, amazing. Yes?
Two biggest challenges. The question is, what are the two biggest challenges at a dot? Well, let me start with what's really amazing about a dot, and that is the people. I mean, I've worked in a lot of Jewish institutions, and this is such a warm, is that better? This is such a warm community, so it's really a pleasure to come in here. We have some challenges shoring up our processes, and we're working really hard. I have a wonderful, small but amazing staff of people that I work with, and we are all committed to looking at everything we do and documenting what we do and making sure all of our processes, from our HR processes to the way we conduct business and interact with our community to our financial processes, that are all shored up. So in the short time I will be here, I hope to work closely with a lay committee that's going to help us do that. So that's one. That's probably the biggest. Another thing that I'm really trying to do is really coach our professional staff. I've had a lot of experience in managing people, and I'm working really hard with our directors and our professional staff to help them be the best that they can be. And I think that those are probably the two biggest things I'm working on. So I'll tell you the story. My friend Jill is someplace in the back. I was in Chicago on vacation, and I got a call from Jill. I hadn't heard from Jill in many years. We were in a book group together, and prior to that, I've known her for like 45 years. And I saw Jill's name in my phone pop up that she's called me, and I thought, wow, called her back. And we had a very friendly conversation. How's Marty? How are the kids? How's Michael? What's going on? I said, okay, why are you really calling me? And she told me that Eric had left, and he had been gone for 4 months, and they really needed somebody on an interim basis. So I said, let me think about it, and I called her back the next day. I had a wonderful conversation with Christine after that, and I just feel really strongly in the Jewish community, and I really felt that if I could come in and I had a skill set that could sort of settle things down and provide some leadership and help a community, then it's just part of who I am as a professional, but also as a Jew. And my husband was supportive, almost. He's supportive now. And I just felt that it was worth me giving up my life of retirement for the time it'll take to help you guys find the absolute best person to lead you forward. Well, I made the commitment to Christine that I would be here for 6 months, but I also told her that if it takes a little longer to find somebody, because I think sometimes you have to look at when people's contracts expire, and that's typically June 30th, that I would be willing to stay longer to get the right person. I believe the board is putting a committee together next month after the holidays.
Anybody? Did you ever experience anything like what we've gone through with the predecessor?
Absolutely not. I work with. Had I ever experienced anything about what happened with my predecessor? And the answer is absolutely not. I work with incredibly talented executive directors, not only in Los Angeles, but across the country, that are the hardest working, smartest people I've ever been around. And this was a shock. Lee.
This may not be the best question because it is Yom Kippur, but I'm going to raise it since you're an expert in this area. What is the best flavor at Cold Stone?
That's an easy one. I ate coffee ice cream every single day for 5 years with chocolate chips and a little fudge. My hobbies, okay. Well, prior to coming back to work every day, I went to the gym every day. So I went to the gym 6 times a week, and I really enjoyed that. But I'm an avid reader. I garden. I dance. I was dancing 3 times a week, line dancing, which unfortunately I've had to give up for now. And seeing my grandchildren. And travel, right? My husband and I like to travel. Yeah.
One of the innovations, if you will, that I recall came along with the party, especially here in the Castro country, was this notion of the sustainability model for membership at synagogue. What are your feelings around that concept of pay as you go?
I love the idea of not having to have a financial aid committee looking at people's financials. That was one of the things I hated about my job previously. But I will tell you that it takes a lot to run a facility this size and to bring in professional staff that have the competencies to move you forward. And I'm a little bit nervous. We're going to look at the financials. We're going to look at what membership brings in and what donations bring in as soon as the holidays are over. But I have to be really honest, it makes me nervous that there's no floor, that people can pay whatever they want for high holiday tickets, for membership. I think it's a strain on an organization. Unless you have donors that are going to be in the sidelines and throw money into the operating budget every year to make you whole, I'm very concerned about it. But it's a decision made at this synagogue. Obviously, we're going to make it work, but it does give me pause.
Previous director, it sounds like the ultimate come out of it is that there'll be big changes as far as actual oversight and rights and privileges, let's say, and authorities that an executive director will have, or now a more, more heavy-handed board as far as actual, hardcore oversight of what the executive director and staff are doing. Do you know, was a dot behind on that? Is it just something that within the world of Jewish operations is just sort of understood everyone's going to be friendly to each other and be trustworthy?
I think you're asked, maybe can you restate the question a little bit tighter?
So, admittedly, I don't know the specifics of everything that has happened, but it seems like from what has either been talked about or letters sent out, that the authorities and power given to an executive director or to just in general to staff might not have just been too open door, and so things were there was an oversight that was missed. And I wonder, just having worked in the world in the financial world, where oversight is something that is stamped in your brain, that nobody can do anything without somebody else approving it.
Yes, I think, yeah. So you're concerned with the previous executive director that there wasn't sufficient board oversight. And I will tell you that executive directors have a lot of leeway of making decisions and engaging in activities, but they always do it with a double signature. So I think I don't think there should be one signature. I always had signature authorization in my other job, but it was always with another board person. And I have been here now for about 6 weeks or so, and I haven't seen anything in the processes that are going on now that indicate that there was anything lax on the side of the board. What I saw was a very clever person who knew how to manipulate the system. And I don't know that that would have been discovered because it was very clever. But I will tell you that we're going to develop very strong processes, and we have to have a strong partnership between the professional staff and the board. They have to work together in concert. Well, we tried to keep it for what, Michael, about 10 or 15 years? Yeah, and for the first 4 or 5 years, we went away often, but it got really hard to find places in national parks. And then I got really busy with work, and Michael's an accountant. He got busy with work, and it was not being used often enough. So we ultimately sold it. Yeah, we kept it on the street. You had to move it every 3 days in Los Angeles. It was a pain in the ass. That almost ended our marriage, not the trip. No, I'm going back to my gym 5 days a week. No, I really like retiring. I want to be able to travel, and I've worked for many, many years. So the answer would be no.
What are you looking for in an executive director for the synagogue with all your background and knowledge and knowing what the past has happened with the former executive director?
So the question is, what would I be looking for in an executive director? I think I would want somebody that had a very, very strong financial acumen and had really good HR management skills, and could manage security, which is a very big thing in the Jewish world right now, have the ability to write grants and process the grants to fruition so you get the reimbursement. Getting the grant is the easy part, the reimbursement is not. So somebody that had that skill set, somebody who gets along well with people and is very organized, and yeah, that's, to me, those would be key things for a person. Good, thank you. It was a pleasure being here, thank you.
That was really informative and wonderful hearing your story. Thank you so much. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then Ken Aitchison, husband of Rabbi Alexander, and Mel Aronoff, husband of Judy Dubin Aronoff, are going to tell us the inside story of what it's like to be married to clergy. So hang around. Let's say 5-minute break. So I was reminded, for those of you who are streaming at home, we said we would begin the second one at 2:55, so that's what we'll do. And hang on, and we'll see you soon.
Two mics. We're not going to walk around. Are you planning to walk around? Are you planning to walk around?
No, she would want to.
I can
Oh,
take this
yeah.
and walk around.
Hello? Speaking? Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know.
How about when you met, your most embarrassing moment?
It would take hours for those embarrassing moments. It would take hours to list all the embarrassing moments.
Well, what about one? You know, like raising kids with a clergy member. What was that like?
We weren't raising kids with a clergy member. They were already older.
Oh, well, you can.
We know what we're going to talk about.
Okay, you just have. Oh,
We're good.
right. And if you don't feel like, Joanne said she would come up and ask
Is this your phone?
what you guys are saying. So when you talk and finish.
What is Joette going to talk about? Oh, she's going to talk about
She's also
being-
married to
Right.
clergy. So I didn't think about it.
Different kind of clergy.
Right.
Chaplain. Going to different places.
Yes, so she had a really interesting experience. So, she said some people asked her about it. So, she gave her a few minutes.
Can't say any.
Are you going to be directing?
How are they going to speak freely when you're here? You can correct things. That would be bad.
Not a good idea.
We all have our narratives.
That's right. I said that's what
There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as truth. The whole thing is Middle East is narrative.
Right, that's right.
Yours is equally good. Adolf Hitler had his narrative.
Don't forget the whatabouts.
Don't forget the what?
The whatabouts. Whataboutism.
I'm not going to do it.
Well, we wanted to get finished early enough so that we could go. Didn't they say 3:15?
Finn's favorite teacher.
This is fruitcake. Fruit stand. Right. Fruit stand, right. Right.
I like the cake part.
Right. Don't say cake.
Okay, everybody, did you stretch? You're awake now? You can find a seat. And I'm going to take this microphone around when you have a question so that everybody at home can hear. And Ken and Mel will paraphrase. So sit down, everybody. Come on in, sit down, or go outside if you're talking.
we've been very serious today. This has been a very serious day, and you know, it's fine to have fun and frolic, and there won't be anything but that with Ken here. I'm the straight man, but you know, waking up in the morning to see what happened in England and knowing that the responsibility that we've got, fortunately Ken is on the security team with me, and it's the kind of thing where we know about it, we're prepared for it, but it adds a certain somberness. I don't know anything about the families or whatever, but what happened is something that we've had much practice in dealing with exactly what occurred today, and we just need everybody to keep their eyes and ears available and report. So we have to do that as a team. But going back, because this is about the clergy spouse business, we have known Leslie and Ken since they came to Adat Ariel. Actually, I remember that I had some Talmud classes with Leslie back at the UJ when I was going through my conversion process. I meant that by way of converting from growing up Orthodox to convince myself that I was an atheist and not observing anything, to meeting the clergy, my spouse, who became eventually a clergy here, and absolutely reversing my course. And I am smitten with Judaism, conservative Judaism, with women now. We've got a daughter who's also a rabbi at VBS, for those of you who are not aware of that. But it was, my whole life was transformed on the day that I met Judy and found that I was talking to a girl who actually did the same thing as me, with the same portion of Torah reading for our bar and bat mitzvah, Korach, all about a rebel. Not a good rebel, but a rebel nonetheless. And she read the whole thing. I read the whole thing. We led services. And I said, I've never met a girl like that. Growing up in my insular Orthodox world, I didn't know that there were women that actually did things like that. And so, got to find out more about this. And most of our married life, until Judy became the cantor here, she was not an official cantor anywhere, as our younger daughter likes to call her. At that point, she was an illegal cantor. But she was the cantor at UCLA Hillel on the high holidays. And so we already, long before she became the cantor here, we had a relationship for decades. And so it was nothing really big or different. It's the same person, so she became a clergy here. And little did I realize that this became our home away from home. When we first moved to the Valley the year after we were married, I had grown up in the Valley myself, went to Grand High School by dropping out of the yeshivot that my parents wanted me to stay with. So I knew all about the Valley. Judy was really frightened to come to the Valley, and because that's where all the snobbish girls in Camp Ramah were from. But the fact is that financially it was not even conceivable at that stage in our lives when we first got married to stay on the other side of the hill. So when I showed Judy our first house, her mouth dropped open and said, "We can't afford it." And I said, "Yes, we can." And so we were there for a long time, but we've been in our current house much, much longer. When we needed a little bit more income to enable our older daughter to go to NYU, there was an opening and there was an opportunity, because we'd already been going to Adat Ariel for years, but everybody seemed to want to have Judy. When she was on the market, everybody wanted to jump at that opportunity because people knew her voice, knew her neshama, and everything about all of her values, and that made a massive difference to me. But I came at least with knowledge that I gained from going to Jewish day schools for a long time, and Ken had the opposite approach. You want to tell him about that?
So, when I met Leslie, I didn't grow up observant at all. I mean, we went to synagogue occasionally, and I had a bar mitzvah, but I was not very knowledgeable. But I was kind of moving in the direction of observance. And when I met Leslie, I was just back from 4.5 years in London. So I was still getting used to that bright thing in the sky that, I think they called it a sun. Yeah, right. We didn't see that there. So I thought, well, how would I meet Jewish girls, as I said at the time, or Jewish women? And I figured, well, let me take a class in Hebrew. And I looked in the phone book. Remember phone books? And there was a listing for something called the Jewish Learning Center, which was at a synagogue in Solana Beach. We lived in San Diego. And so the secretary was not very energetic, so she said, I'll have you talk to Rabbi Alexander. So the phone switched over to Leslie, and I'm a little confused because this is 1984. There were not women rabbis. What? That was not a thing, at least not in my mind. Anyway, we met each other, and then we started going out. Now, at some point, I was on a phone call with my parents, and I was talking to my mother, and she asked me, are you seeing anybody? So I said, yes. Is she Jewish? Okay, yes, she's Jewish. And then I started saying, and she's a rabbi, which was about the time my father picked up the phone. And what he heard was, I'm dating a rabbi. Wait a minute. So I had to rewind the conversation. Anyway, I do remember, so this was, remember me saying I wasn't very observant, getting thrown in the deep end, because the first time I had Shabbat dinner at Leslie's house, I show up and I open the refrigerator to get something out. I said, oh, your light bulb's broken. I can help it. She goes, no, don't do that. Why? Well, because I don't want to use electricity or turn on the light on Shabbat. Okay, fine. Then I go in the bathroom, and the toilet paper is torn into pieces. So I said, what's that all about? And I guess, because she even though she went to Hebrew Union College in New York, she really went very observant, I think, as a reaction to HUC, because they were very that way, But eventually, I got used to it, and everything was fine and great. And eventually, we moved up here because we went through a couple of job changes. Am I taking over your thing, or?
Go ahead.
I'm done. So we moved here to Adat Ariel, and I remember the way Leslie got introduced to Adat Ariel was she was at a rabbinic conference, and she got a lift back from the conference in Palm Springs, right? What? You gave him Danny Gordis. Everybody here knows who Danny Gordis is. Danny was the assistant or associate, I think he was assistant rabbi to Moshe in the early 80s. And he told her that he was leaving and she should apply. So she did, and she got the job. I remember it was a very happy occasion because she got the phone call, she got the job. We had 2 cats. We were celebrating. The cats got a can of tuna fish. We had we had something else, and it was, and of course, it's a little stressful because being the wife of a rabbi, the husband of a rabbi, is not a traditional role, right? I mean, the sisterhood doesn't know what to do with me. They say, I don't know. He doesn't bake. He doesn't, So I kind of, got a pass. I didn't really have to do all the things that maybe the traditional rabbi spouse would have to do. But I have to say, Adat Ariel was a very warm and welcoming congregation. Eventually, we had 2 children. We had Shira in '88, and I think Judy went into labor at Leslie's baby shower, or something like that. You went into labor here at Adat Ariel a week later. Our kid, Yael and Shira, are born a week apart. So I think we've been very close ever since then. And as as we continued through the years here, I think my role has been, more or less involved. A lot of the time, I'm just Rabbi Alexander's husband or Shira's dad. And I remember one funny event. It was actually on Rosh Hashanah, and you all know who Henry Winkler is, right? Fonzie, that they used to go here, and so I'm walking down the breezeway, with Shira, who was then 5 months old, and Henry comes up to us and says to Shira, he says, "You look beautiful. May you be inscribed in the book of life." Hi, Ken. Kept going. Hi, Ken.
The funds.
The Fonz.
Yeah. So we've all met so many people over the years. No, it's just that he's talking in closer. Or is it louder? Here, we'll trade. Yeah, keep it a secret.
Nobody will know.
All right, fine. So in the way we raised our children, and we had discussions, different backgrounds, Judy's experience was that Jewish kids should go to public school. I went to day schools until I dropped out in the middle of 10th grade. And then I went to Yeshiva University for a year in college because that's the only place my mommy and daddy would let me go to that was out of town. A year there was enough for me to turn around and go back to UCLA. But when we talked about what we were going to do as we raised kids, I was a strong advocate, regardless of my experiences, but I was a strong advocate for day schools. And the great thing was that Adad Ariel had day school. And the sad thing, of course, the tragic thing is we've not been able to keep the day school going. But so we talked about it, and it was pretty clear that our daughter, or at that point, our first daughter, and then we had a second daughter, the one that's Shira's age, that they would wind up in the day school here. And so our girls went through the day schools without rebelling like me, all the way through. Yael in particular went all the way through high school at Milken. I don't know whether we ever met Sheila back in the day. And the benefit of the day school education is enormous, but it's only one of many things, and that really tend to give kids a sense of affiliation with Judaism and with the state of Israel. And because I'm one of 5 kids myself, and the other 4 are very observant, one in fact is in the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox world, but 3 of my siblings live in Israel, and in particular during the last 2 years, my fun reading in physics and the sciences kind of went by the wayside instead of the focus on Israel and what's going on there. I don't know if anybody here has got immediate relatives that have been fighting in Gaza. Maybe there's a few, but it's a very, very different focus. So I was very gratified that our daughters had such a strong connection to the state of Israel. 1 year in rabbinical school for Yael was in Israel, and her Hebrew is amazing. But I think that what the key is that Judy as the dugma, as the model for how to have a connection with Judaism, even if she didn't go to cantorial school, little secret, but I don't think she's lacking in any skill set that is necessary to fulfill that job. And I have to say that when our girls looked at her, it was a natural. At that time, when they were younger, we would go to UCLA Hillel regularly for the high holidays where Judy was a cantor, and our girls just took to it very naturally. So, of course, they both can read Torah, and they have all of the skills because of that. So one of the joys of being a clergy spouse is the love that this community shows to my wife. And it's well-deserved because She has a massive combination of musical talent and also Hebrew knowledge, and also the ability to have kavanah, to focus on the tefillah that inspires everyone. If there's anybody that disagrees with me, don't raise your hand. But so I think that is, we had already had a marriage for a long time by the time Judy became the cantor here. And she started off as the associate cantor. Ira Beagleisen was the cantor then, and until he left and retired, things changed a little bit, only in the sense that her work got busier and busier and busier. So if you want to know the secrets of what goes on as a clergy spouse, you're going to be married to somebody who is working, basically I always call it 24/8. There's like, this is a very, very demanding position. She excels at it, and I would love her to find the time to spend more time with this retired attorney here, and more time, but the job absolutely demands it. So the only way to stay in touch more was to become the manager of our security team here. So I got to hang around with her a lot more. You got a question? So is Ken now. In the past, basically, I want to repeat, okay. The question was, how do you deal with it when we were in our working lives? And it was something where we just kind of naturally figured out different roles and responsibilities. Don't say role? Oh, right. He's getting hungry. So I think it was more not a plan, but we just kind of did it day by day. I had a demanding job that had at least 10-hour days as well. So, we sold our kids off to the neighbors, so it was okay. But no, it all worked out in the end. And I don't think it was anything more stressful than most people in this room who've had 2 jobs, 2 careers together, and trying to fend their way through it. The only exception is that Bennett Spiegel told me the other day when he asked me something about scheduling, he said, that's what a clergy spouse does. You can answer the questions when she's not available about scheduling it at .rel.
So I can talk about the 2-career thing. I would say for any 2-career couple, you're going to face the same challenges. It gets exponentially harder when you have children, and particularly in this case because Leslie had a lot of evening meetings when we were first here. And so, I worked for a defense company down in El Segundo, so I was home pretty early, but I would get home at 4:30, we'd have dinner, and then she'd be off to meetings. And when Shira was very small, before she could speak, Shira made her displeasure known at this because I would be holding her, and we waved goodbye to Leslie, and as soon as Leslie closed the door, she would go, "Wah!" until Leslie came back. Later on, she expressed her opinion about Adat Ariel by saying, "I hate those people," because her mom was out that many nights. She didn't really hate Adat Ariel. She just didn't like it that her mom was out. I would say, now that Leslie's back working part-time, she's only working 9 days a week, right? So it is a very demanding, career. I have always chosen jobs that didn't require me to work, that many hours. And because of me, I didn't want to, spend all my waking hours at work. I did have, when we moved to Northern California, I did have some very busy jobs, but I made time, to be home with the family, and we, I think we worked it out, but it's tough. It's a challenge. Hank.
Do you feel you lost your identity? I know my wife's right. She uses the name Sarita Stevens. My male cousin, Henry Stevens. Her real name is Sarita Tarlow. But I had to learn to live with the fact that she is well known out there where I'm not so much.
I don't think, oh yeah, the question is, do we feel like we've lost our identities because of what our wives do? I don't know, I don't think I did, but I'm in a totally separate world than Leslie is. You know, I'm a chemist, I worked in semiconductor technology for many years, I was a CEO, not like, you know, Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or anything like that, but small companies, but I don't feel like, what's that? I don't feel like I've lost, yeah, that guy, right. So I don't feel like I've lost anything. I will tell the Las Vegas story.
You want to tell it now?
All right, so this is a question not about identity, but it's about my observance level before we got married. So when we got married, I was not keeping kosher. I then started keeping kosher at home with Leslie. But where I worked, I would go eat, you know, hamburgers, chicken, whatever. When we moved here, I kept my job down in San Diego, which means I had 4 hours of driving a day, 2 hours each way. And I worked out a deal with my employer that I would only work Monday through Thursday. And so I would leave the house at 6 a.m., get there at 8. I would leave there at 6 p.m. and get home at 8. This was really fun when we bought a house and had to refurbish it ourselves. So you can imagine. But shortly after Leslie started here, there was a weekend or something where nothing was happening. So she said, let's go to Las Vegas. Okay, I'd never been there. Have you ever been to, you've been to Vegas before, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'd never been there. So we went to Las Vegas for a night, 2 nights, I don't know, whatever it was. And I said, I think it was late at night, and I said, you know what I haven't had in a really long time is steak and eggs. So she said, well, you know, we told Moshe Rothblum and Adad Ariel that you would keep kosher. I said, yeah, but nobody's here. Nobody's gonna see us. So she said, I don't want to know. Just go downstairs and eat. So I go down to the coffee shop and I order my steak and eggs. And of course, somebody from Adad Ariel walks in. Hi, Ken. How you doing? Hi. Hi. But they didn't say anything about the steak and eggs. But you know, that was a little embarrassing, which reminds me of a joke. We told this the other day that I heard first from Moshe Rothblum, which is of a rabbi who's traveling to New Orleans, and he's from Minnesota, and he goes into a restaurant and he says, nobody I know could possibly be here. I'm going to order whatever I want. So he orders the roast suckling pig. Anyway, he's having a drink, and who walks into the restaurant but the president of his synagogue? Rabbi, it's so nice to see you. May we sit with you? Sure, okay. And he's looking around, trying to find the waiter, can't find the waiter. Eventually, they bring the roast suckling pig out, and he looks at the pig, and he looks at his, congregants, and they're looking at him, and he says, what a restaurant. You order a baked apple, and look what they bring you. That was really the last time I ate anything treif. So I learned my lesson.
So while we're on the subject of steak and clergy, so when I met Judy, I was in my phase several years, not super long, of not keeping kosher at all. And yeah, I went all the way. And what happened was one time we went on a date. It was probably before we were married. I don't remember. It was before we were married many years ago. And so we go to a restaurant, and I have the steak. It's not kosher steak. And I noticed nobody I knew growing up was around, let alone congregation. And then, wanted to kiss her goodbye, and her first reaction was, ew, you've got that smell of the treif steak in you. So I said, fine, I'll keep kosher. But, you know, with regard to Judy's family, I don't know, a lot of people may be aware of this, but her parents met at the Jewish Theological Seminary at the choir. So the Judaism and music were well ready for Judy when she came along. And her family was also amazing. Ken mentioned getting together with the family. It was really an eye-opener to me for a couple of reasons. The first time I was over her folks on a Friday night, her sister's also very musical, a singer, as many people here might be aware. And so I'm sitting at the table, and it's time for the Zemirot for Shabbat. And I sit there, and I'm an audience in a concert of 4-part harmony for Zemirot. And I'm looking and listening to this, I'm going, wow, it was never that good in my Orthodox family. This is a cool group to be with. But what made it even cooler was Pinky, the rabbi, Judy's dad, said, you want to go watch the Laker game on TV now? On a Friday night? Unheard of. So I said, maybe I'll find something out more about conservative Judaism and how they roll. Rolling, yeah. Well, we said steak, we said ice cream, we said a lot of things. Don't worry, we'll be out of here on time. But so basically, you know, the day-to-day experience as Judy being the cantor here, first of all, it doesn't affect my sense of identity, Hank, especially having very, very accomplished daughters in their own rights. And the biggest problem I have is that there are people that I may recognize the face, may not, and come up to me and say, hi, Mel, and I have no idea who the heck they are. The vast majority I do know, but every now and then there's somebody going, I'm glad you know my name. So that's really the only thing in terms of interactions with people. We, of course, had been members here for many, many years before Judy became cantor at all here. So everybody got to know us. It's just home. It's not like going to some strange, unusual, or different location or different group of people. We knew all the people by the time she was cantor, and they knew her, and they wanted her, and that was very gratifying. It's always made me very, very happy, the accolades I get, especially after these high holidays where people go, your wife is amazing, and what a meaningful service. And those are the kind of things that make a massive difference. So rather than the dirt that so many people wanted to hear from us, I can tell you I've got nothing but love and admiration and praise.
Well, speaking of dirt, no. I actually have a pretty good memory for names and faces and you know, stuff that I call, well, useless information, trivia. Not Jerome level, but I remember a lot of things. So Leslie often asks me, who was that again? And I'll tell her. She says, when was the last time you saw them? I don't know, 1988. I smacked on the head. I will say, just to pick up on what Mel said, Adat Ariel is a very different place. And, you know, again, having not grown up observant and, you know, going into a synagogue can be kind of an intimidating thing, at least for the first time. And a lot of synagogues are very formal, and like any organization, they have a personality of their own. And the thing was, when we came here first in 1986, I didn't feel any of that. I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel anything but warmth and friendliness. And I think it's kind of amazing that after so many years, I think Adat has retained that personality. It's just different. You know, during the pandemic, we were sometimes watching services at Sinai, right? David, I know, but sometimes we would watch to hear David Wolpe's sermon, because he was an excellent rabbi. But I looked around, and it looks like such a stiff and formal place, and it has its strengths, and you know, people are loyal there and go there, but.
That's where we got married.
Oh, there you go. I couldn't imagine myself in a place like that because I think I'd feel out of place. But I never feel that way here at Dad Ariel. So, Jim has,
Yeah, it's actually a joke I heard or read in a Jewish journal.
as long as it's not about food, you can,
Has to
Right.
be a question.
right.
And perhaps you could explain it, because I don't really fully understand the punchline. If a male rabbi's wife is called a rebbitzin, what is the spouse of a female rabbi called?
Thank you for that question.
The answer in the joke was lucky.
That's right. That's how I was trained to answer that question. However, when we first got here, Linda Fife, who's now doing yoga, so I can make fun of her, said, "Oh, you're the Rebbits." So that's how I refer to myself. What are you, a cantorette, cantorine? I don't know.
have anything to do with it with my voice.
I wasn't going to say that, but any more questions? Rabbi Alexander? Cantor Aronoff, any questions?
Questions right here.
Who? Oh, yes. So the question is, as our children were growing up, did we have issues with our kids being the children of rabbis and cantors, clergy, and the expectations? That's a really good question. So I'm going to answer partially for both of us because both of our wives are rabbis' kids. So they had to live through a little bit of that, what are the expectations? I don't feel like we imposed any really strict behavioral restrictions on our kids any more than we did, normally as normal parents. And I think the trust was reciprocated. They didn't do anything, as far as I can tell, maybe you know more, I don't know, out of the ordinary. But yeah, I know that can be an issue. And again, part of it has to do with the Dad Ariel. And when we lived up north, we belonged to other congregations that had some similarities. And it wasn't like everybody was looking at us or our kids with a microscope, trying to find what we did wrong or, how we were transgressing or something. So, but it's a good question. I don't think our kids were badly affected by it. No. You got a rabbi
Well, I got a rabbi as well.
as a kid. One of your kids is a
Oh, my kids.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, one is a rabbi. So one of the things that surprised me that I only heard in the last year or two from one of our daughters was that on Friday nights, they would get invited to parties and different places like that. Now, bear in mind that I always resented how my parents were so restrictive because of Shabbat observance, but instead I got the exact opposite. One of our daughters said, and I think both of them said this, we never would go out. We always turned down those invitations for partying or whatever it might be that was not really Shabbistic, as they say. And so we never told them to be that way. They just simply had the attitude that that was our expectation. That's what we would do on a Friday night. There'd be shul, there'd be the Shabbos meal, we wouldn't be going out ourselves. So I think that somehow or another, our kids translated into meaning that they had to do it the same way. So on some level, I was gratified that we set the kind of example that they have followed through with. Joette. There is another person who is married to a rabbi in this room. Could you please come on down and tell us a few things about your experience? Bear in mind that her husband was an Air Force chaplain, rather different experience than with a regular congregation. And he was a wonderful, wonderful rabbi.
Agreed. So being in the military was not like being at a Dot Ariel. Wasn't warm and welcoming all the time. But my role, because the Jewish community was so small in the military, my role was always everything that you thought a rabbi's wife should do plus. So, you know, I was in charge of the religious school. I mean, technically he was in charge of it, but I kind of ran it. Plus, it was good that I was professionally a teacher. So, you know, there were military obligations that were completely unrelated to Judaism. And there was an opportunity, which Marv took very seriously, to share Judaism with non-Jews. And there were more of them around than there were of us, obviously. So one of the things that other chaplains, who were all some Christian denomination, either priests or ministers, would say is they were always so impressed that we were so steadfast in our Judaism, and particularly in being kosher wherever we went. They couldn't imagine that they would have the ability to restrict their diets the way that we did. And for us, it was just, that was the way we lived. I remember 2 instances of kashrut that came up in the military in particular. We were stationed in Spain, and the commissary did not carry any kosher meat. So we were fortunate that there happened to be a kosher butcher in Madrid, so we could go there. But Marv wanted something at the base, so he went to the commissary and asked them to go contact Empire and get Empire kosher chickens and other foods if they could. And they said, we can only do it if we order a minimum amount, and that amount needs to be sold in the commissary before we could order any more. So he went on a campaign to convince, and especially the other chaplains, that kosher chickens were better. And luckily, they found that it was true. They liked it better, so we got to have that. Another time, we, wherever we lived, we had kosher food shipped in, and we had one instance where we were living in Florida, in the Panhandle, so there's nothing Jewish there, and the food was flown in from Atlanta, and the airport in Fort Walton Beach was adjacent to the Eglin Air Force Base. So he would get a phone call, and he would drive out to the airfield, which was the shared parts of it, and pick up our kosher meat. It was a very different thing. I mean, everything Jewish at a base relied on us. If we didn't do it, it didn't happen. And so that was kind of a heavy load to carry sometimes. You know, we had to arrange everything. I mean, one year for Marv went in and koshered the kitchen for the Seder. I made 250 matzah balls. I ended up with yellow hands for a couple of days after that from the rolling them, the fat. But yeah, I said matzah balls. Yeah. But it was because he had a position, I had a position. It came automatically. You know, we didn't have a sisterhood because there weren't enough Jews, but when we got to a base, we had an instant community. Like, you know, you're only at a place for 3 or 4 years. It's hard to develop friendships. Like when we came here, it took a couple of years to develop the friendships that we made. When you move in the military, it's instant. Marv would arrive, we'd say services Friday night, and every Jew on base would show up out of curiosity at first, but that became instant community. And so for whatever time we were there, that was our community, and then we said goodbye, and we're off to the next community. It was different. We certainly appreciated coming here, where Marv had the opportunity to sit in the congregation with me. So that was a treat for him, and we feel he did as well as I do now, that this was our new family, and it just, as they said, it's home. Any questions?
So, yeah, so the question is, how did our families accept the fact that we were married to clergy, or, you know, and what it meant for our lives? I think my mother had problems with Leslie at the beginning, and not because she didn't like Leslie, because I think she had problems with that whole career thing. You know, she's from a very different generation. She grew up in Europe before the war, and, you know, was in several camps. So I think she had, you know, that kind of viewpoint of things. My father, I don't think expressed anything negative, did he? I think he was perfectly fine with it. But eventually, I think my mother warmed up to Leslie. And then I don't think there was any issue about whether she was a rabbi or not. Do you agree? No problems. Well, you know.
Okay. My family was more concerned with the military aspect than the fact that Marv was a rabbi, because we just kept hopping all over the place. We'd live 3 years here, 3 years here, 4 years there. And so that made it harder for them, but they loved Marv, and my parents are Reform. I was raised Reform. When I left New York, I was shocked at how little non-Jews knew about Judaism, because in New York, they knew. And that brought me to be more outwardly Jewish, and then I met Marv, and so that worked out. But my parents were Reform Jews who were not kosher at all, eat everything. It didn't matter to them what we did, and we just let them do what they did, and it all worked out. I mean, they loved him as a person, and so there weren't any other issues.
In conclusion today, based upon everything that's been said, I would say of the three of us, I had the most concern about how my family would accept. At that point, Judy was acting as a cantor at UCLA, Hillel, and in the Orthodox world, anything that deviates like that far, not just that it, you know, but it's a woman who's a cantor, and to my pleasant surprise, my father in particular I expected would be the most negative. He turned out to be the most positive, and he heard Judy's voice. And so he bragged regularly to the very Orthodox family that would be the most judgmental that you can't believe how great her voice is. You have to hear it. It's great. My father actually had a terrible voice, and he wished that he could have been a cantor himself. But when he heard Judy's voice, it was like so different. My mother was the one that was kicking him, saying, "Are you telling them all about her and telling all the truth? Shouldn't do that." So that's my experience with my family relating to that.
This has been really a wonderful conversation, and we're so grateful to all three of you for sharing your varied experiences. And I just want to add that my son, Noah, is married to a rabbi, and so he calls himself Rebbitzman. That's his answer. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate and always enjoy having discussions and sharing ideas. And thank you to our speakers. It's made this afternoon really great.